Welcome to a special Liberal Conversation series of the Dissidents podcast. In this series, we invite guests who have resources, ideas, and viewpoints that will challenge us to reflect on liberal values, what they are, how they are applied, their impact on us as individuals, and why they matter for the larger communities in which we live. The Dissidents podcast is brought to you by the Institute for Liberal Values, a nonpartisan and non-sectarian consortium focused on the promotion of individual freedom, rights, and liberty in everyday life.
Hello, and welcome to the Dissidents podcast. Those of you who've listened before are probably familiar with our my guest today, Winkfield Twyman Jr. He has given me permission to call him Wink. He's a
Yes.
former law professor and writer, and he writes and thinks and talks a lot about trying to understand relationships across color lines in America, particularly. And he was born in and talks a lot about living in the South. He's currently in California. And we want to talk a fair amount today. We might go off track, but about the situation with the college presidents who testified or were called to Congress and some of the fallout and our thoughts about that. So I want to, though, give you, Wink, a little more time to introduce yourself, a little more thoroughly, and your relationship to this topic in particular.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation today. I think it's very timely. You know, it's interesting. I was born in 1961 in Richmond, Virginia, in a segregated hospital, St. Mary's. And my life literally has been the story of America's change on race. I began school in a segregated elementary school. And in the fall of 1969, due to federal pressure from the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, I transitioned to a school where I was the only Black kid. And that would be the case more or less in all my classes through junior high and high school. I grew up in Chesterfield County, a southern, small town, suburban place. I have fond memories of it. But in a sense, I kind of view myself as part of a Moses generation, in a sense that the things that I knew coming of age seemingly are now going into reverse. You know, we're talking about Harvard in this conversation. My very first interaction with Harvard was as a reader. I was very impressed that more presidents came from Harvard, U.S. presidents, than any other school in the country. And that impressed me a lot when I was in junior high school. I applied to Harvard College, actually, and that was my first interaction with an alum of Harvard. His name was Mr. Levy, and he was on the Harvard Alumni Admissions School Committee. He lived in a nice home in a leafy part of Richmond, West End, called Windsor Farms, and I remember that interview to this day. I did not get into Harvard College, and so I devoted my 4 years in college to getting into their law school, which I did on February 9th, 1983. Still remember the big envelope. So I graduated from Harvard Law School in 1986. And over my life, Harvard has been there in some ways not. As fate would have it, my big sister at Harvard Law School in the BALSA program, the Black American Legal Society, I think, was Loretta Lynch, who became U.S. Attorney one day. And my little sister in the BALSA program was Michelle Obama, a lanky little kid from Chicago who would become First Lady, as we all know, and married to the U.S. president. Also a Harvard alum, I might add, as well.
Yes.
And former president of the Law Review at Harvard. So Harvard's been a part of my life for some time. In fact, I'm going to show people. There you go.
Yay!
The diploma on the wall. That's right. So I have a particular interest in the issues involving Harvard University's president, Claudine Gay. And I look forward to a delightful, introspective, and productive conversation.
So I am essentially you're out in California. I'm essentially in the backyard of Harvard, MIT, because I'm just south of Boston, and I teach at a small-ish state school, approximately between 8 and 12,000 students a year, depending on whether you count just undergrads or graduate students, and obviously year to year. And being in sort of sort of the backyard. I would say we're often in the shadow of, these elite institutions, obviously,
Mhm.
quite literally, but also more in terms of I see my own university administration and faculty taking signals from those universities because they very much want to sort of be seen as the what I want to say, that like the economical alternative, right,
Mhm. Mhm.
to some of these schools, or like go to an undergraduate, get a good undergraduate, education, and maybe
Mhm.
someday you
Sure.
too can be an Ivy Leaguer or whatever. And so so what happens when, like, one of these schools issues a statement is that a couple of days later, the administration at my university will issue, sort of a mirroring kind of statement. They
Mhm.
very much sort of take the lead. And in terms of, a lot of the, like you said, things going backwards, I think things seem to be going backwards at a faster rate. I think on the
Right.
two coasts, we're on, like how now you can fast forward at different speeds, right, like
Right.
at 2 times and 4 times. And sometimes I feel like we're at like the 6 or 8 times going backwards sometimes.
Yeah.
So this is yeah, I think it feels very close to home to me in a different way than it does to you, because I know that whatever happens there is going to, sort
Mm.
of leach into almost into the air. It's in the air that we breathe here very
Mhm.
much. So
Well said.
um I was so well, I mean, I think you should really uh talk about, not just, you are, you obviously you have a law degree, and so I do want to talk about those aspects. I don't have a law degree,
Mhm.
but you know I think that we all are interested in sort of the legal aspects
Sure.
of what a sort of a harassment or whatever
Mm.
policy would be on campus, what kinds of things, and then the legal aspects of what they said in
Mhm.
the congressional hearing,
Sure. Sure.
but then also this visceral, emotional response.
Right.
And yeah, so anyway,
Well,
so I'm
to
gonna
be
let you
honest with
talk.
you, yeah. Well, to be honest with you, I really see it first and foremost as a moral question. It's a
Hmm.
moral issue. Um, to me, moral competence is a question of it's an innate sense of right from wrong. It's an innate sense of what feels appropriate as a human and what doesn't. What affirms human dignity and what doesn't. To me, the question is calling for the genocide of Jews, a violation of the Harvard Standards of Conduct. I believe that was the question. Well, to me, the answer is not a legal answer. So
Ah,
the answer should never be context, although arguably there are some First Amendment scholars. I'm thinking of my former law professor, Charles Freed, who we can talk about maybe in a later moment, who is
yes.
still at the faculty at Harvard. But that was not a legal question. It was a moral question, which demanded a moral answer, particularly in these times, particularly after accounts of anti Semitism on campus, particularly after the October 7th atrocities by Hamas in Israel, particularly in light of Harvard's abysmal ranking by the Foundation for, I believe it's FAIR, the Foundation for
The
uh,
Foundation for Individual
Individual
Rights and
Rights and
Expression.
Expression. Right.
Yeah, it
Harvard really,
used to
yeah,
be education, but now it's
gotcha.
expression. Yes.
Well, to their credit, Harvard excelled, and they were the absolute bottom, zero. In
Yes.
fact, I believe they had to be given a few points so that they would be at zero as opposed to negative. So, in light of those factors, the spotlight was on our leader, and it was a moral moment. It was not a legal moment per se. It
Right.
was not a technical
Right.
moment. And that was why I had great consternation about that. And actually, I believe the next day, I think I called for the resignation of Harvard University Claudine Gay for those reasons. Yeah. What do you think? Is this a moral question first and
Well,
foremost?
yeah. So you know what? I think I mean, obviously these were not politicians, right? And
Mhm.
they had actually met with a lawyer, I think provided by the UPenn,
Mhm.
um, Liz McGill, she brought with her a lawyer. And I think that the three college presidents met with that lawyer proceeding. I think that their mind was very much probably on the legal aspects. And I would have, as, maybe a politician would have been better at saying morally, yes, it is against the code of conduct.
Well, I'm going to push
And
back a little bit if I can, Elizabeth. I think that President Claudine Gay of Harvard is renowned for her political skills, her skills as a
yes,
politician
true.
within Harvard University. So I don't think that should be held as a reason or an excuse
Right.
for her failure to answer a moral question directly.
Yeah.
I think of Harvard divinity scholar David Wolpe, who, in the moment after her testimony, resigned from the Anti-Semitism Advisory Committee. He didn't need to consult a fancy elite law firm for whether or not he should resign. He didn't need to check the pulse of the Harvard yard to decide whether or not he should
Right.
resign. In the moment, Rabbi Wolpe saw the response, saw the moral question and the moral answer to the testimony, and I just applaud that so much. Number one, and number two, as an alum, my expectations are that our leadership excel in the arena of moral character, moral courage. Moral courage will not be given to you in the moment by outside counsel.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The lawyer sitting behind you in the seat can't tell you the right from wrong. That comes from your soul. And so I think that that was a real difficulty for me.
Mm-hmm.
Do you happen to have, by the way, a clip I shared with you, which
I
I
do.
saw as a moral moment?
Yes. So I'm going
Okay.
to, you have to
We should
let
set it up a
me.
little bit. So just for those who are watching this is an example of something I saw as a master class in a moral moment. How does someone, without benefit of counsel, without benefit of conducting political surveys, without looking at, how does someone recognize and respond and engage to a moral moment in the moment? Take it away, Elizabeth.
Okay.
And
And we can,
we're go ahead.
we'll
And we're in the
link
White
this.
House. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
we're in
So
the White
this
House.
is, yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, so this is part of the uh, uh, television show, right?
Yes, the West Wing.
The West Wing. Yeah. Yeah. And
Yes.
so they do a good job
And there's
in.
and the lady talking at the beginning is Mary. I don't remember her last name, but she's part of a Christian evangelical movement, and they're pressuring the White House to take certain measures. And the staffers for the White House are there. We have Toby Ziegler. He is a White House communications director of City College of New York from Brooklyn. We have the press secretary, and her name escapes me. If you remember Elizabeth, but I just can't remember her name in the middle. And then we have Josh Lyman from Connecticut, and also, ironically, a Harvard man, a Harvard graduate. And what I find interesting is that Toby happens to be a Jewish American, as is Josh. And so now I think that nicely sets up the issue. So they're meeting with Mary on some issue related to Christian efforts regarding public policy. Take it away.
Okay.
It was only a matter of time with you, Josh. That New York sense of humor was just a
Mary, there's
Reverend,
no
please.
need.
They think they're so much smarter. They think it's smart talk, but nobody else does.
I'm actually from Connecticut, but that's neither here nor there. The point is, Mary,
She meant Jewish. What she said, New York sense of humor. She was talking about you and me.
You know what, Toby? Let's not even go there.
It's been an apology. Let's move on.
What I love about that, Elizabeth, is Toby had every reason to let it go, to let it slide. In fact, he was encouraged by Josh, his colleague, who's also Jewish, to just let it go. He did not. He did not. He saw that there was anti-Semitism there, and he stopped the conversation cold, and he called Mary on it. I don't think the president of Harvard University would has the capability to do that. And to me, that's a problem. Whereas if 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 Rabbi David Wolpe had been there in that moment, he would have had the same response, I suspect. If George Washington, the president of our country in 1790, had been there, he would have done the same thing. There's a very famous letter from President Washington in 1790 where he makes it clear bigotry has no sanction in this country when he was asked the question from Jewish citizens in Rhode Island about their protections as citizens. If George Washington in 1790 could see the moment, if Toby Ziegler could see the moment, certainly one would expect the president of the Augusta Harvard University to engage the moral question in the moral moment. For me, that was a problem.
And I think one of the things for me that put it in that same context was that she has taken an opportunity to take a moral stand over and over and over again. She doesn't seem to be too interested in taking a moral stand with regard to anti-Semitism. However, she has taken many opportunities to engage in, moral criticism, what we, commonly call cancellation, within her own, even, people that she actually, in her role at Harvard before she was president, in her roles as deans, as a dean or as other kinds of administrative roles, has not just allowed others to, undermine people's, moral character, but has participated in that.
Well, Elizabeth, you're so kind. Let's name names. Let's name names, shall we? President Gay went after and terminated a Black law professor, Professor Sullivan, as tutor at the Winthrop House. Why? Because she did not like his legal representation of disgraced media icon Harvey Weinstein. Now, as lawyers, we know that the most noble thing a lawyer can do as a matter of moral courage is to represent the despised, because everyone deserves legal representation in our system of government. Instead, Gay chose to terminate a man of moral conscience, and that probably sent a chill throughout the community. Don't cross this lady. Second, the amazing, incredible Professor Roland Fryer. Professor Fryer conducted path-breaking research into the question of whether or not indeed there were disparate killings of unarmed Black men by white police officers. His raw findings undercut the current narrative. Now, an intellectually curious person, I don't know, maybe Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., maybe Justice Story, Charles. I could go on with the Harvard greats in the past, but a curious person would have maybe had sat down with Professor Fryer at the Harvard Club in Boston, and let's review those facts, those data. I just want to know what. No, the response was to seek the removal of tenure from Professor Fryer, an unheard of action in this 400-year history of Harvard. Who does that? But that's a cold-blooded, cold-hearted move because someone disagrees with your preferred narrative. Misgendering of pronouns, I believe, at Harvard is considered abuse under the standards of conduct. But calling for genocide depends upon context. That's a double standard there. And you've already mentioned the abysmal ranking for free speech under Fryer. We don't even need to talk about the issues involving plagiarism
Right.
and the disdain of Professor Carol Swain. Shall we just say this? Once again, Harvard University is a jewel in the American experiment. It is indeed, in a sense, the shining city on a hill on the Charles River. How have we reached this place? And then I will go further, Elizabeth, and say, is it that people are afraid to see the moral problems because of one's race and gender? Could it be that there's a desire to circle the wagons around someone that dogma tells us is automatically oppressed. Never mind that one is the daughter of an engineer, that one graduated from the esteemed New England boarding school, Exeter, Stanford undergrad, PhD from Harvard. I'm not sure that counts as oppression. I could be wrong, but that is the argument. That is the dogma. Elizabeth, there's so many reasons why I think we need to move on from the administration of Professor Gay.
Yeah. So one thing I will say is because what you described as, oh, she moved against, Roland Fryer. And, people probably got the idea that, oh, she's not to be crossed. But I'll tell you this, in my experience, so at my own, again, admittedly small university, and I joke about this all the time, but there's a reason why none of us who are teaching at my university are at Harvard. Okay. We are not great scholars, right? We are not the jewel of Boston, right? We are, we're good enough to get our PhDs. Yes. And so we're pretty good. Yes. We are pretty good at knowing our field. We're pretty good, but we chose to go, for whatever either we chose or we did not excel enough, right, so that we are now at an institution focused on teaching, for example, But I will say that I do not believe that the linear progression was from Claudine Gay to, I'm worried that I don't want to cross her. I believe that the foundation was already there. She felt very secure in doing what she did. She knew she had backup. There was already this large contention of people who she knew she was buoyed by these, so there, I think all of this we were seeing in universities in little dribs and drabs, and because we are academics, and because most of us are very open-minded, nobody identified it as dangerous or what. It's like, oh, this is a field, of study, and pretty soon everybody is working on the margins of equity, right? So we have, equity in such and blah, blah, blah in physics, and and such equality of something over here. And it's sort of, everybody's working on the margins. And guess what? You don't have to be a scholar of those things in order to get published. So you can be sort of sort of somebody like me who doesn't have this like great and wonderful, record, and get articles published in these either obscure journals or a teaching journal or a maybe like an administrative kind of journal that just says exactly the same thing, that somebody else said in literature. You can say it over here in chemistry, and you can get, you get your publication. So we have these little pockets of things.
Interesting.
That's where people are getting credibility, where they're gaining, a little, sort of kudos, right? If you will, maybe they're getting tenure based, because you just got to have some pubs in a place like me where I am. You don't have to have like, federal grants and all this kind of stuff. Right. And so I see how it just sort of like moss growing on things, in the shady areas. Okay. Right. And so then when an opportunity to, call somebody out on something, all that foundation is already there. And so we have, an opportunity then to show how righteous we are, how to sort of like show how clean our hands are. And so we pounce on somebody. And so I think that what she did with Roland Fryer had, don't get me wrong, I'm sure it had, consequences, and it elevated some of what was already going on. But that was already there. Hence, by the way, he would not have been doing that research if that research were not already something, because, that was a
Right,
part
right,
of the motivation. So I think the sort of the shadows, the growth was already there, and
right,
that
right.
gave her and I'm not saying, look, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying she didn't take an opportunity to
Sure.
show how powerful, how strong, how important this moral issue, whether it truly was or not, but how important, to make a stand about how important some
Right,
kind of,
right.
this moral thing would be. And this is what offends me, I think, more even than the testimony, is that you were willing to take a moral stance over and over and over again for, I mean, look, as you said, how many times have administrators, not just at Harvard, but all over the country, said words are violence?
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
and so you don't get to say then what you should be. You don't get to suddenly say the right thing, which is words aren't violence, when you go to Congress, and then spend
Right.
all the rest
Yeah.
of your time saying that words are violence.
Right.
And so but here's the other thing is, I don't want her to resign. And here's why I don't want her to resign,
Why?
because of everything that I just said. I want, as soon as she resigns, who are they going to hire? Somebody just like her, somebody who's also comes out of these shadows and has proven themselves willing and able to take action on certain moral, and air quotes, moral topics. And so nothing will change. They'll get a scapegoat, just like my university got a scapegoat when they canceled me. It's like, oh, look, again, clean hands.
Sure.
We will marginalize her. We'll say that, her 2 words on a survey were violence, and we'll make a big stink out of it and call her a white supremacist and get rid of her.
Right,
So
right.
if that's what happens to Claudine Gay, they'll just hire somebody else. And the story will be that she was a problem, that she made a mistake. But all of these other people, the people who
Yeah.
hired her, the people who allowed her to get away with all of this, again, we can talk about plagiarism a little bit, but some of the other stuff,
Sure.
they hired her. They let her get away with it. They gave her the message that what she was doing was the right thing. If you keep promoting somebody and you keep patting them on the back, they're going to keep,
Now, let me offer an alternative way out of the situation. And actually, I credit 2 sources. I credit Elon Musk, and I credit my home experience in my county back in the 1960s. The answer could be this. In the 1960s, my all-white school board refused to comply with Brown. So Brown had been in existence since 1954. It was the law of the land since 1954. But as of 1965, the all-white school board just wasn't feeling it. They were not motivated to desegregate schools. So you might ask yourself, well, what changed? What could make an all-white school board in a southern county receive the gospel, find the Holy Ghost? Well, it was so pedestrian as just to be unremarkable. What happened was the Congress in the 1964 Civil Rights Act included in Title VI a provision that any program or agency receiving federal funds could not discriminate based upon race, sex, all the things. And so the bureaucrats at the Department of then Health, Education, and Welfare decided, well, we're going to enforce this. We're going to develop regulations that school boards across the South have to follow. Now, that ran smack into the culture at the local school boards of, well, things have always been separate. We don't really care about Brown. And this is a question of local control of our schools versus the evil and personal outside forces from DC. But as fate would have it, money talked. In 1966 in my county, there was a tremendous debate about whether or not the county should desegregate whatsoever. And the feds in DC said, well, if you continue to segregate, you're going to lose $139,000 in federal funding. That was a big deal in 1966 for my little county. And then in 1968, the bureaucrats in the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare up the ante. You're going to lose nearly $1 million in federal funding if you don't cut the crap and desegregate your schools. And there was a very emotional school board meeting. And eventually on August 28th, 1968, they capitulated, money talked, and they packed away their scruples about desegregation, and the schools were integrated. Why couldn't, similarly, people who are concerned about where things are going at Harvard simply rely upon Title VI once again, but not in the context of racial school desegregation, but in the context of anti-Semitism? In 2004, the Department of Education made it clear that anti-Semitism falls within the ambit of Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. So why not encourage, suggest, make aware that Jewish students, Jewish organizations, Jewish entities on campus should keep records and file complaints with their Department of Education officials or with their Title VI office, alleging that there's some discrimination here, which is harassment based upon anti-Semitism. And if they can show that, Harvard would risk losing any and all federal dollars. And that could be over $1 billion, $2 billion, I don't know. Consider all of the money that comes in through student loans. I know student loans are federally subsidized.
Well, federal grants too.
Bingo, bingo. So one could easily imagine, despite this love for the current university president, money once again triumphing over the concern about local control of the faculty. I think there's an idea to pursue Title VI for Jewish students and entities who feel that there is harassment based upon religion and based upon national origin. What do you think about that? Title VI.
Well, of course, I don't want to pretend that I know more about
Right.
the law than I do. And so, I mean, I guess I would, I certainly would support, looking into that.
Yeah.
But here's one issue that would happen, I think.
Yeah.
So universities already want to have these bias reporting systems.
Mm-hmm.
And like they're trying to write into the state contract right now that the university would be able to investigate and actually terminate us or, deny us tenure or whatever, based on anonymous complaints.
Right.
And so it's not, these are like vague, like there's anonymous complaints about what?
Right.
And so my suspicion is there would be a Title VI office created with all of the associated, associate vice presidents and support staff and everything. And that they would pour, most of their resources into public relations efforts in order to avoid what you're talking about, because that's sort of the MO is create an office of blah, blah, blah.
Oh, but that's coming from the local office at the college. I suspect the impetus for these actions would be coming from Washington, D.C., from the bureaucrats in the Department of Education. Right. They would have the incentive, the legal incentive, the moral incentive, one would hope, to replicate what the bureaucrats did back in the 60s with public school segregation. In fact, you could argue that I experienced integrated education, as did millions of Black kids of my generation, not because of the Brown decision in 54. It was because of tireless, unknown to the public, bureaucrats in the Department of HEW who were tirelessly creating these regulations and sending letters to school boards saying, comply or you're losing $100,000 in federal money next school year. Comply or you're losing $1 million. And
well, that's one of the reasons why people are graduating high schools at record high levels is because, No Child Left Behind said, you will graduate a certain number of people, otherwise you'll lose money. And unfortunately, the outcome of that has not been particularly positive. But you were also going to talk about, so we've identified this as certainly an option to explore, right? What about, you were going to talk about Elon Musk too.
Oh, well, Elon on Twitter just simply said, cut off their money. If you cut off funding, that'll solve the problem, which is a variant of this Title VI idea. And, it's interesting because I think that's true. But I ask you, Elizabeth, is that blunt caveman solution, is that consistent with liberal values or not? That's my question to you. What do you think? What do you think?
Well, I think it's very Machiavellian, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's why I'm saying, like, one of the issues is that we would equate correlation with causation, right? And so so if we, and so, again, to use the No Child Left Behind sort of example, it's like, oh, people who graduate from high school make more money. So let's make sure more people graduate from high school. Well, wait a minute. Maybe maybe the people who graduate from high school are just better at conforming to rules. You know, they just, they're more conscientious. They show up at school on time, even if they aren't paying attention or if they're asleep or whatever, they're just physically there, which means that there's just like a little bit more going on, no matter how little, it's enough. And to create all of these processes whereby these people can graduate, that are special and, meeting them where they are and all that kind of stuff actually is not helpful in terms of their future integration into society. So essentially what 75 years of research shows is that conscientiousness is the best predictor of whether your marriage survives or not, whether you go to jail or not, your income, your lifelong income. So by sort of encouraging this, like, oh, we'll figure out a way. Don't you worry. We'll figure out a way for you to graduate. So I guess I would say that was not a very liberal policy, right? And while it came from a good place, like so many things, right? It came from a good place. It was not a good execution. And anyone, I'm sure, I don't even know how many people trained just even this much in statistics said correlation is not causation, and we're not going to have, and that has now infiltrated. It's infiltrated the entire school system, and it's infiltrated college and everything now. So I just got an email the other day that said that they're going to track us by the number of people who pass our courses and their race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status. So they're going to track us. And then, of course, what happens? 2 weeks later, I get an email that says, do you think we should do away with the required the required grade in certain of these classes? So basically, we have two. So it's like, if you don't give them at least a D, you're going to get flagged for, whatever. And we'll just get rid of the C or better requirement. So now everybody gets at least a D. Because, is this these the people who are proposing these things believe that they're liberal policies, right? And that they're, again, sort of like, well, we're going to meet people where they are and we're going to help them and all this kind of stuff. So I think that, I don't know that I care that much whether it's a liberal policy or not. I want to be sort of like more, again, sort of more outcome oriented, and if it gets us, and so we can get liberal policies passed that end up being quite illiberal, I guess. And so what makes more sense to me is to focus on an outcome that's better, that's truly better for people. And if some draconian processes have to be implemented in order for, this is what it means. Like, this is why utopias don't work, right? Because people cannot be convinced all the time to do what's best for everyone else. So you have to have sometimes people must be again, these sort of like, some people have to be sort of under the thumb, under some kind of threat of something in order to truly, and they can't maintain it. It cannot be maintained. So
I want to pick up on one of the words you used in your answer, your very good answer, conscientiousness. What is that? How are you defining that term? What does that mean?
Well, of course, so I have a degree in psychology. So, here's the thing: in all of that research, different. It was, a book-length meta-analysis. So basically, they took all different kinds of measures of conscientiousness. There are certainly personality measures of all different ilks. Some of them just have like 4 questions that say things like, I work hard to keep an orderly something, or I think it's important to be on time for whatever, I'm typically on time. That sort of some questions maybe about like sort of being internally driven, an internal sort of
Moral
judgment.
compass?
Yeah,
Judgment,
exactly. Like a judgment. Yeah. So those kinds of things. Now, again, there was like military research. So there would be different measures. And there are measures, again, there are measures that as few as 4. And then there are measures that would have, probably, 50 questions that would measure conscientiousness. And then some of them were behavioral measures where even, outside people sort of judged your conscientiousness based on, what some of the behaviors that they witnessed say.
Based on what we've seen in the public square in the past 3 years, let's say, would we assess President Claudine Gay as a conscientious person? And I ask you because you're the psychologist.
So I would have to say probably not. I mean, like I have a few issues. I have not thoroughly researched the plagiarism issues.
She's not your patient, so you can't say that.
Well, and I'm not even a clinical psychologist. So, but I haven't researched the plagiarism issues, thoroughly. But some of what I see is I would call like overblown. A few things. Okay. So I'm going to for example, like, and I even teach my students that like sometimes there's just only one way to say it. So a couple of the examples were where she wrote about her statistical analysis and then had like, something, the heteroscedasticity of the data is not, cannot be reflected in this measure because of the test that I did, blah, 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 whatever. You know what? Like, how many ways are there to say that? I'm sorry, but this person did not the person that she supposedly plagiarized from did not make up that word, heteroscedasticity. She did, and it's like, when you're talking about the results kind of statements, when you analyze data, there's only a couple of ways to say that there was a significant difference between group A and group B at this level, okay. So those I really don't have a big issue with. And I will say that the person, that particular one, I think came forward and said, I don't think that that's plagiarism also. A couple of other people came forward and said, I don't think that's plagiarism. And I think that they are being overly forgiving, I think. And that's, that's their prerogative, I guess, if they want to give her a pass. I think, there's a little bit of, I just choose to be flattered kind of thing that she, What I find more damning in terms of conscientiousness is the Swain argument and a few others who have come forward and said she actually plagiarized our ideas. And then I find, and I think this is semi-credible, that because again, this isn't my political science, isn't my area, but that's her, right? But people saying, look, even her committee would have been familiar enough with the literature that they would have realized that her work was derivative. And there's not a look, you can do that, right? It is, especially in psychology, we cannot complain when people say that they want to replicate our work, right? Because we've had a replication, very public replication condemnations. And so when people replicate our work, there are entire grants just for replication, right? And so you credit where credit is due. And you say, look, these were the original researchers. I'm going to do something. I'm going to replicate that. I'm going to extend it. You honor those who came before you, because there frankly are not that many new ideas under the sun. So I find that more damning in terms of conscientiousness, that someone would not again, someone who is training to be an expert in their field, the way that a medical doctor or a lawyer or whatever, she's training to be an expert in the field of, say, political science. And you should honor the people from whom you have been learning for the last however many years, 10 or so years. And and that person would perhaps be honored that you were honoring them, right?
Yeah.
And there is a level of conscientiousness there. I think most people are embarrassed when they find out that they've lifted a little phrase or something like that, because when we draft things, we draft and then we go back and then we probably go back again, and sometimes we're not sure or we forget that we move things around, we move sentences or paragraphs around, and sometimes the connection gets lost, and most people are very embarrassed that something like that happened. And I think that I would have actually, as far as like the individual sentences and stuff, again, I would have said, like, it's lovely that she's embarrassed, and would have shown a level of conscientiousness and that kind of thing to say.
But you didn't see that. You didn't
see that. No.
And that's troubling, is it not, from the standpoint of, that's interesting.
And here's the other question is, are we in fact then teaching certain people that conscientiousness for them isn't as important as maybe some other traits?
Very good point. Very good point. And what are the consequences of that? What are the downstream consequences of that?
Well, I mean, for her, not so much. I mean, she's been winning, right? And we have other examples. We have the Donald Trumps of the world who seem to be able to get away with, pretty much and even say, I could get away with thus and so, and nothing's going to happen. So there are other examples. I mean, now here's the thing, I guess somebody like Donald Trump came with, sort of arrived into the world. I think there's a joke that some comedian, I'm stealing some comedian's joke that was then repeated to me, so I didn't even see it. But like that, so like pointing at an unborn, like a woman who's pregnant and saying, that baby has a, 800 credit score right now, and so like, they can that baby can get a home loan right now, right? And so do we have certain, Donald Trump was essentially born with a, 750 credit score or whatever. And so are people like Claudine Gay, who were, who had all these, what does it mean to be privileged, I guess, and in terms of people's personality, the sort of how we develop in the world in terms of personality, not in terms of,
Well, let me give you a personal example of how I kind of felt that double standard, perhaps, or that sense that some were privileged and others are not. And this brings me back to Professor Charles Freed. When I was in law school, my very first year, my very first month, my very first class, and my very first assignment in my first class in law school, Professor Charles Freed was my professor. I think it might have been like legal methods or legal research and writing. And I forget, the assignment was like maybe to write a motion maybe or something like that. And, I didn't know what I was doing. I was just out of college. He tore into me. He criticized my feeble efforts left and right, up and down. I was exposed to a devastating, exacting standard. And I was just a little 22-year-old kid. First class, first legal assignment ever. Now, juxtapose my experience in the fall of 1983 with Professor Charles Freed's defense of Claudine Gay's use of the word context. He was very, very, forgiving, very expansive, very welcoming, very concerned about, well, there's the nuance here, there's the context. He quoted a U.S. Supreme Court case, Brandenburg, which, by the way, is not really applicable because it applies to state action, not a private actor like Harvard University. And so I just thought to myself, golly gee whiz, is this the same Professor Charles Freed that I knew that, slammed my little paper in my first year law class, up and down, left and right. Like, why would I get the savage monster treatment from Professor Freed, but Claudine Gay, the president, gets more of a kind of touchy-feely, hands-off, we're all in this together kind of treatment? I kind of felt a sense of, what's the word? Unequal treatment, shall we say, from the same man. Yeah, I was really concerned about that, because you could easily punch holes in the legal arguments that he offered on behalf of President Gay, which leads me, Elizabeth, to my next crazy idea. Are we witnessing an explosion of a cluster B disorder at Harvard? And when I say that, what I mean is the President Gay almost a metaphorical mother, and the children are the faculty members, the board of the overseers, and the alumni association. And they all know not to cross mother. They learned that from how Professor Sullivan at the law school was terminated. They know that from how Professor Ronald Fryer was treated. They know that from how the slightest misstep in terms of pronouns are treated. They know how she went after the George Floyd issue as if it was personally her, and yet calling for genocide depends upon context. Could it be, and you're the psychologist, could it be that we see the outlines of a cluster B disorder at the Augusta Harvard campus today? How else do you
Well,
explain unanimous support for Mother Gay from the Board of Overseers, from the Alumni Association, from over 700 faculty members? Am I seeing the same President Gay that they're seeing, or am I just free from Mother Gay?
yeah. Well, one thing I would say is that I think it's actually less pathological than you sort of laying out. First of all, I mean, obviously, I mean, I realize you're using a metaphor, and of course,
I am, yes, I am.
yeah,
Right.
universities don't have personalities, right? Individuals have personalities, and what. But I would say it's much more human nature, much more basic human nature than and less pathological. In that, let's just take the very simple thing, like somebody that, well, sort of even the Roland Fryer, I mean, I'm sorry, the professor that you were talking.
Oh, Freed, Charles Freed.
Freed that you were talking about, you feel some sort of like connection to him because it's a very visceral experience. It was your first paper,
Right.
and it's very, whatever.
Exactly. Right.
And you probably actually in many ways, like maybe you didn't even very much like him, but you appreciate it. It's like, but he called you on some things and you were like, holy crap, this is serious now. This is like, I'm at Harvard Law School.
You bet.
Right.
Kingsfield, paper chase.
Yes. And so, so you have this sort of like personal connection there and everything. And then, so you then feel quite disappointed in him, even though he has no memory of this paper that
I'm sure he doesn't.
No.
Right.
And so this is just like sort of a human nature thing, right? Like this is sort of in some ways a parental figure, and you don't want to be disappointed in our parents. We just don't think, our parents.
Right.
Okay. So, but I would say that things like people wanting to support Claudine Gay, for example, these are people who hired her. They put a lot of effort into that search, into, she just got appointed, and there were probably sparks flew. People got mad at each other, whatever. And so you have a particular investment. And so just like when, you put money, she's a sunk cost in that way, right? So you put money into your,
I think that's right, but wow.
You put $1,000 into your car to get a new radiator and new hoses and all that kind of stuff. And then, somebody steals the catalytic converter and, whatever. And so you're like, oh, I guess I'll just put another, $500 into it.
Right.
This is a sunk cost, right? And so I see this kind of, they're in for a penny, in for a pound kind of thing. And, it's like, we already did all of these things. I mean, it has to be worth it to have hurt Roland Fryer that bad. It has to be worth it. you know? And so all of this, it's like we just keep pouring, you know, our physical, emotional resources into this sunk cost, because otherwise we would have to admit we're wrong. And again, that's one of the reasons why I don't want her to just resign, because I think then nobody has to reevaluate this, all of the resources and everything that they've poured in. I want people like her, it doesn't have to be her, but I want people to, I want there to be a reckoning that isn't just this, you know, oh, we'll just sweep her aside and everybody else gets to say, oh, phew, thank God she's gone, you know.
Right. But
I
okay, but let's take that a further step. So let's assume we do that, or rather the people in power do that. What are the consequences internally for Harvard if she remains in place year after year after year? Because presumably these are issues of character we're discussing. These are issues of moral courage and competence. Those things don't change. Next month, it could be something else. Another 6 months, it could be another moral moment.
right.
What are the consequences internally for Harvard University over the coming year after year after year?
Yeah, I guess I wasn't really, I guess I have two things on that. I guess I wasn't really imagining year after year after year.
Oh,
I was
really?
imagining, you know,
Okay,
I was
well,
sort of thinking of like this, you know, like there's this, oh, we'll just lop off the arm kind of thing, you know, and it's like,
right.
so like, we're not hearing anything about University of Pennsylvania right now, because it's like, oh, you know, Liz McGill is like, she just, you know, she's like, oh, she's back in her her law school office, and, you know, we're all gonna, you know, shoo, right? And so I guess I wasn't thinking like year after year. I was thinking of sort of like, you know,
So
this.
you don't foresee her viability year after year after year. Am I correct, Elizabeth?
Well, I mean, maybe she could, but I guess I really hadn't thought that she could sustain for you know, for that long. Yeah.
So how
And then
how would you foresee the end happening then? How would you foresee that coming to an end?
so I would love it if there were actually sort of an acknowledgement that, you know, this didn't go well, right? And
From the Board of Overseers,
yeah, right.
Oh, good
And
Lord.
sort of,
That's not going to happen though, right? Because she has unanimous support.
well, does she?
Oh,
So
talk to me, Elizabeth. Talk to me.
well, I don't have any inside knowledge, but I think that's human. That I think what we're seeing is like some human nature kinds of things here. Like one person resigned in protest, right, with Liz McGill, right, and you know, said I actually support her, and you know, I'm not going to stick around with these, you know, with these people who don't support her,
right.
We had one person at Harvard, you know, like you said, the rabbi at Harvard who but now he resigned his position on a board. He didn't resign
That's right,
entirely.
from the Anti-Semitism Advisory Committee, but he's still a visiting scholar at the Harvard Divinity.
Right.
Although query, Elizabeth, will he now face the wrath of Professor Gay at Harvard?
Oh, look, not just, I don't even think she has to do it. She is going, no, he is already, I guarantee you, he is already suffering the wrath, and she does not have to do it.
Wow.
Look, I mean, I have somebody in my, who in my own office who's next door to me, who has quietly, like via text, supported me. Okay.
Yeah.
One time the department chair walked by and I was in that person's office. I felt that I needed to apologize to that person for being in their office, for that person being seen with me. So this is, I mean, there's a contamination that happens. So once it's as if you have leprosy, right? And so there's this, you know, you don't want to be, there's this sideways glance. You don't want to be associated. Now, I'm not saying that the rabbi wants to be associated with these people. Don't get me wrong, but there is a price. There is a social, emotional, even a physical toll of being ostracized, even by people you don't care to associate with.
That's
it
so
is
horrible.
still.
He's a rabbi. He's at the divinity school. You would expect that the most holy, noble, spiritual people, they would be there at the divinity school, right?
Yeah, I mean, I just think that the cost is too high for them to show support.
Uh-huh.
Now, I will say this too, like if Steven Pinker's right, I don't know if you read his,
No, I
full
didn't read that.
page. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he had a full page thing in the Globe. I'm sure it was probably in the Times and other,
Yeah.
but one of the things that he says is, oh, this Harvard, 70%, he just, I don't know, using various polls, guesstimating that 70% of Harvard's faculty are either far left or left fearing, left. So like middle left fearing kind of thing, right? And maybe 30% are sort of middle to right, leaning. Okay. I think that's probably generous to the right, center right.
Yeah.
But if you look at, in one of your Substack things, you said, there's 2,400 faculty members at Harvard.
Right.
So at my school, there's like, 400.
Okay.
Okay. So you have 70%. That, I mean, what is 30%? We have, how many people do we have physically? How many people do we have? How many people do we have that would stand up in even the smallest way? Right. So it's dwindling. There's maybe like 5 people who, and one of the, and most of them, I don't want to jeopardize. I don't want to be harmful to them.
Right.
So even though there's more physical numbers of people, not all of those people are in proximity of him, not all of those people are willing, not just to go against Claudine Gay. She won't even know if they go to lunch together or whatever. She won't know, but there, because Harvard is too big of a place,
Yeah.
But I don't like. What happens is is he going to feel like something that he says, say in a meeting, not in the because he's resigned, but he's going to be at other meetings. I actually email people and that I think that are reasonable people. Maybe they don't necessarily like me, but are reasonable people and suggest that they suggest something, because I know that if I suggest it, then it's going to be labeled. I may not even get called on in a meeting. I may not even have an opportunity. And if I do get an opportunity, that a lot of times they just say, oh, we're out of time. Like, Elizabeth, do you have something to say? And I start to open. It's like, oh, sorry, we're out of time. Right. So these are the things that so if he really wants to make an impact on campus, he got his moment, right? To say, I resign in protest, and, I don't want to be associated. Well, maybe I can't do anything. I was just going to read some. So here's the, so when, the point is not so much to keep your own hands clean as to avoid whitewashing the bloody deeds of others. So that's what he was doing, right? He knows he can't make a difference.
Right.
But there's a whole lot of people with blood that are participating in the bloody deeds, right? And so now he's not going to know when he passes somebody in the hallway, when he passes somebody on campus. So his behavior is going to change. And their behavior towards him is going to change. This is not like a one and done for him. And so it's not just yes, it's impacted by the people higher up.
Right.
But like I said, this is all over. This is sort of like, it looks like sort of benign moss growing on the side of the buildings, but it's not benign. And so unfortunately, fortunately he did what he did. Unfortunately, the chances that he will be able to make an impact moving forward, are very. I'm not saying that they would have been better if he'd stayed. I mean, we all have to make our choices, and we have to make choices that we can personally live with, because there's a difference between, even in their testimony, there's a difference between saying there are rules, there's guidelines, there's maybe ethical and moral principles in my field, and that kind of thing. Sometimes it's like I can't be personally neutral, right?
Flip the facts, Elizabeth. Let's suppose it's not Harvard Divinity School 2023. Suppose it's the University of Berlin 1923. I'm referencing a recent essay by Neil Ferguson in the Free Press published by Barry Weiss. Suppose that Rabbi David Wolpe had made the same kind of moral statement in the moment in 1923 at the University of Berlin, because he could foresee a gathering hurricane or avalanche of anti-Semitism. Would it still have been the right moral thing to do, or should he have remained silent if he were in the faculty at the University of Berlin in 1923? I mean, what do you do?
This is a philosophical question that's been addressed, in the literature. It's just, do you try to change from within?
Right.
Do you appear maybe sometimes to conform and then sort of try to do things in little ways? Or, there's a bunch of different options. Do you say, well, if you resign, you could resign quietly so that maybe you won't be ruined, right? Maybe you could get another job or something like that, right? Do you resign, more openly so that maybe, in those cases, maybe you would have been killed or something, right? Like if you're somebody who's, signing death warrants for, people in concentration camps, they're just going to find somebody else to do it. And so you could make an argument, well, if I can maybe save 3 people, then it was worth it for me to do this horrible thing, because maybe I had this tiny little impact, right? Resigning in protest, what is that going to do? It's going to get me shot, and they're just going to hire somebody else to do it. And so, I don't think there is any one right answer. And you have to make your choices. And I'm definitely not criticizing his choice. My significant other made the same choice. He just walked out. He said, I can't, they're torturing me. And most of all, he could not continue to watch them torture me. They were torturing him, but then watching the torture of me.
Sometimes the good choice is just to leave. I remember that Albert Einstein just left his faculty position because he could see the evil coming. And he moved over to, I think it was Princeton or Caltech, Princeton in 1933. That was a good decision for the world, for the world's knowledge base. Is there any situation in which it would have been better morally for Albert Einstein to have stayed in Berlin on the faculty and worked for change within? Or was that a worthless cause? Was that just a futile cause by 1933?
Yeah.
It's interesting because, I could imagine an alternative Rabbi David Wolpe who could look at the situation at Harvard and think, this is futile. What am I doing? I'm just blowing in the wind. I'm just one person out of 2,400. I'm either just going to say nothing, take my ball and go home, or I'll just resign quietly. So what I like about Rabbi Wolpe is he chose the third option. He chose to make the maximum public impact of his departure and the reasons why. But query, given your kind of bearish prognostication here, will it make a difference or not in the culture?
I hope. Right. I don't think that it will, because it's already baked in again in the air that they're breathing. And I'm not sure how it took time to get here, and it's going to take time, to get out of this mess.
I think that's true. True.
I just would love it if Claudine Gay kind of, has, if she, for whatever time she has left in this position, has her feet to the fire, right? And that some other people also feel that fire. Like, again, I just don't like the idea that they could just say, well, we got rid of her, and so, hands clean, right? No, your hands are all dirty. And although she is, a leader, and the leader certainly helps set the tone, they chose her because the tone was already there. A lot of times they'll put out statements and they'll be like, oh, this new leader is going to shepherd us into the blah, 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 Well, those things were already in your goals. They were already codified, in some sense. Otherwise, you wouldn't have hired somebody that is going to shepherd you into the, whatever. She's shepherding them into a little bit of an abyss. And they have to look, if Harvard never got another cent, they're going to be fine.
Mhm.
So
Well,
it might hurt their
financially,
yes.
they're going to be fine.
Yeah.
But will they be fine spiritually? Will they be
Well,
fine at the
I
soul?
got news for you. I don't know that there is an educational institution that is fine spiritually. I think that there are I think
expand
there
on that.
are some individuals. I think there are some pockets. I think that there may be some, little, I don't know. We'll just take like a, yeah. Well, yeah. So I was gonna say to UT Austin, I'm sure that when they started out, it was like this little bastion of love, and
Yeah.
they were all singing "Kumbaya." I guarantee you, they aren't now. And because they've got, look, if they're going to make it, they're going to have to make some compromises. And so right now, the compromises are very near and dear to our hearts. The reason why people like me, my generation, and I would say people 50 and over, okay, my sort of group of,
Yeah.
the reason we got into education at any level, but in terms of a PhD, was because I thought I was going to have intellectual conversations with
Yes.
peers,
Right.
with students,
That's what it's
that I
about.
was going to
Yeah.
that I never had any kids of my own, and these were going to be my babies, and
Right.
I was going to love them, knowing that the maximum I would ever know them would be 4 years, but that I would, that there would be a few people that
Yeah.
I would connect with, that maybe I would have some impact, or they would have some impact on me in that short time. And then again, I would be in this, this place where there was this love of learning and joy about that. And there is no joy in Mudville. I mean, there is no joy. And there are people who are sort of like living in their little like bubble, things where they, I mean, I get these email strings that are just essentially like, where it's copied to everybody and it says, "Great email, Wink. Thanks, Elizabeth." And it's copied to everybody. Okay. So these are people who are just like, this is their joy, right? This is their joy. They are compromising they're compromising their educational centers. I think that the offense that you have at with Claudine, with her, it's like, where was the moral compass?
Right.
I'm not sure that, I think right now, most people are in this field are becoming accustomed to ignoring their moral compass.
Ouch.
They
That's horrible.
do, because it's almost required. So I'm hearing stories.
That's moral castration.
Yes. Yeah. I think that, I'm not saying that they don't have one anymore, but that it's like spinning wildly, or people are sort of tapping it going, "Hello, it's still working." Maybe due north isn't due north anymore. This thing isn't reading right, kind of thing.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think there are individual moments, still there, but this idea, I think, that had that sort of bolstered individuals and departments and universities and grade schools and kindergartens and all that, was this idea that people want to learn.
Yes.
That people genuinely want to build knowledge, that there's this genuine curiosity in all of us, that needs a place to go and to be nurtured and everything. And that, I think people didn't think that could go away. So any other decisions that were made in terms of, whether we talk about No Child Left Behind or Claudine Gay that's a given. that it cannot be, that fire cannot be put out.
Right.
And in my opinion, we're finding that that fire absolutely can be put out.
So what
And that it's
happens?
just, we're not fueling it. We're not giving it enough oxygen, and it's
So here's my
fading.
question. So what happens to the creative, and I mean just the God-given, innate, genetic, creative person, both on the faculty and in the student body? What happens to the creative souls in this environment?
I
Do
think
they
we're
just
lost. We are lost. I mean, it's like we're in a zombie land,
uh-huh, uh-huh.
So like my students don't have a sense of humor anymore. Like you tell a
Oh,
joke, they don't laugh. I go into classrooms, they don't even turn on the lights. They sit there, um, all separate. Nobody's speaking to each other, and they're just looking at their devices.
sure.
They, but it isn't just students. We're zombies with each other too.
Mm,
And this was already happening. The pandemic exacerbated it,
sure,
but
sure.
it was already, nothing could, a pandemic can't do this on its own. It was already happening. And I think that what also can kill it is the fear, and that's sort of like what you're talking about, the sort of the fear of not just the wrath of a president, but the wrath of the possibility of being of
Mhm,
tripping up, of saying the wrong thing,
mhm,
of doing the wrong thing, of
sure.
laughing at the wrong joke. And it's very, very real,
Mhm,
and there's
mhm,
really no coming back from it. And again, that's why I don't want her to be scapegoated into just
sure.
because she I don't think anyone should be destroyed by one moment in time. And so
Well, how about three
again,
moments, 5
well,
moments?
exactly. I know.
Okay.
There is this, this a
Right,
pattern. I'm not saying that, but
right, right.
I really would like this for Harvard at least. And again, being in the shadow of Harvard, that it would, trickle,
Right, right.
it would be in the air that we start to breathe south of 30 miles south of there. Um, that there would be this sort of like, whoa, how, like, is anybody asking themselves, how did we get to a point where we could say that words against that group are violence, but words against this group
Right,
aren't violence?
right,
And
right.
and I don't know if anybody is asking that question.
Well,
I know that
do you think the congressional resolution will help?
she can ask that question. Here's the
She
thing.
can't. She can't.
No, she can.
Oh, she can.
The rabbi that retired,
Right,
that resigned from the committee,
right.
can no longer ask that question because he's labeled now as as an outsider. Okay. But she can ask that question, and people around her can ask that question. Gee,
Mm.
do you think maybe, like, how did we get to this place?
Oh, I see your
Because
point. Yeah,
they're still insiders.
I
And
see your point.
so I don't think that long term she can survive this, but if she can survive long enough so that there's some kind of reckoning as opposed to just a scapegoat we're washing our hands of her. So I
Well,
interrupted you. You asked a
no,
question.
no, no. The problem. No, those are good comments. But wouldn't that require Gay to have self-awareness?
Yeah.
And you've
Or
already
someone around
suggested.
her or whatever. Yeah.
Oh, like who? Like university council? Like
Yeah.
vice president?
Yeah, like other people. Look, I mean, I hope, but maybe I'm wrong. I hope that she has some people around her that will tell her the truth.
Mm.
And maybe she doesn't, maybe she's
Oh,
seen to it that she doesn't.
so it's kind of like a President Nixon situation in August of 1974, that things get so bad that you even have your closest political
Right.
operatives saying, we really can't be there for you. Maybe it's time to go. I see your
Yeah.
point. So we need to keep her long enough so that she encounters her August of 1974 moment, kind of the Nixon in the White House moment, where she's drinking Jack Daniels, lonely, depressed, just
Yes.
office having
Yes.
isolating with no one. Why does the world hate me?
Yes. Yes.
Maybe it has to come
Yes.
to that. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know. I just, I don't want her to be a martyr.
Right.
I want her to, to actually be a symbol, I don't want her to be this like symbol of, I want her to actually be part of a change.
A change.
And yeah.
A
But
change. We have a change.
that's just me. So
Yeah.
why do you think that other than things like the academic, MIT has a very strong academic freedom alliance, for example. They have some other qualities, but why do you think that here as testament to how little attention she's gotten? I can't remember her name.
I can't. Right.
Yeah, like how is she getting now? Is she? I don't know. And here's another question: do you? Why is it that it was 3 female presidents?
Well, I mean that shows. Doesn't that show the welcome change in demographics among our higher ed leaders? In other words, aren't we centering women these days as opposed to men?
So you're suggesting that those names were drawn out of a hat, and because there's more of them, there was a random
Could
selection.
Could be.
Yeah.
Could be. Because
Okay.
Yale does have a male president.
Yeah.
In fact, I met him over homecoming. So yeah, he's there. But and UVA has a male president. So
Right.
but
I just wonder. I just wondered.
Did you not like the optics of 3 female presidents before Congress?
Look, I mean, this is, I'm maybe creating a sexism that doesn't exist. I'm
Right.
not, I have no basis for this whatsoever,
Right.
but I did kind of wonder if it's sort of like, well, these are the expendables kind of, it's like, are we sort of like getting women here because we want to make a scapegoat of them or whatever. And maybe, would these women be better targets? I don't know. I just wondered, how is it that it's 3 women and one of whom's Jewish, one of whom's Black? I don't know. It's just, I have no basis for that whatsoever.
Yeah. I have no idea. Don't know. It'd be purely speculating. I mean, I tend to think it's probably a combination of demographics and ideology. I think.
Yeah. And they were chosen because, in part, because it was known that when they asked some of these questions, it would be really, really hard for them to answer.
Right.
Now, I was pissed off because I thought that no one had asked them the same question about, say, Black students. So,
but they did. They did. Yeah, they were at that
but they
question.
did. I did see that. Yeah. But because that one kept getting replayed and replayed, I'm like, why didn't they ask that first?
Right.
And because of course they would have said, yes, that's definitely against the the code of conduct. And then I also saw, I don't know if you posted it or not, but I also saw where the one Black congressman was asking about the segregated dorms.
Yes.
And they couldn't answer those questions either. They could not answer those questions. That was not racism. I don't know. So it seems, and this is something that my co-host Mike Burke is always saying, and that I'm finding more and more now that he's tuned me into it, which is some or maybe even most of the most hard over of maybe, of these ideologues don't really know their own literature, don't really know the basis of their own sort of the foundation of the ideology. And so
they're just mouthing slogan words in the moment.
Yeah. And I find this in my own university, where when I challenge somebody, or I said, oh, well, I've actually read that, and it's, I can say I annotated it, I can send it to you or whatever. And, oh, they've never read it, and but wait a minute, you just cited that as as your as backup for our conversation. You just said, well, so and I've actually read that, and this is what
right,
and they can't do it. And so I kind of got that feeling of during that congressional hearing, which was that, do you actually know your own school policies? Like, if you were, I don't know, and I don't know if that was if that really was that they weren't as familiar as they should have been, maybe a little too cocksure of how maybe a little too flattered that they were called to Congress as opposed to being
Oh, well,
scared,
that's possibly, that's,
maybe
yeah.
a little bit of that, or if it was simply that they were trying so hard to hedge that it came across maybe
Or
as
maybe
not,
they were over prepped by their legal counsel. Maybe they were
right,
told repeatedly, this is the magic word. This is
right,
the magic word. Context, context. Say it
right,
again, Gay. Say it
yeah,
again. Context. And
yeah,
but once again, that goes towards moral competency and moral courage. If you are like Toby Ziegler in the clip we showed earlier, in the moment, you should be able to engage the moral question. You don't need to consult outside counsel. You don't need to consult
right.
the political temperature of the campus yard. And I think you're right. We no longer have that level of moral leadership at our top universities, but we sorely need it, because I really think that there are knockoff effects from moral courage in national leadership, because moral courage sort of sets the precedent for future generations to come. It kind of sets forth the pathway for how a school, a university, or a country will progress. I wrote somewhere that, we sometimes give George Washington a hard time because he owned slaves. But on the flip side, when it comes to Jewish Americans and anti-Semitism, he was such a blessing, because in the 1700s and the 1790s and the early 1800s, believe it or not, anti Semitism really wasn't a thing in colonial America or the early United States. And I think to some degree, I credit George Washington, because he was like God walking on earth. He was the divine. He was the man who single handedly created the American Revolution more than any other single person. And for whatever reason, this son of Mount Vernon in Virginia, he just lacked that moral defect we call anti-Semitism. He really viewed everyone as the same, regardless of their religion. And there are several examples of that. When he was asked about hiring workers for his plantation, he said, I don't care if they're Christian, I don't care if they're Muslim, I don't care if they're Jewish, as long as they can do the work. Another example, his stepdaughter, Polly, had severe fits of epilepsy. And so George and Martha would go to Williamsburg, Virginia for treatment. And their family doctor was a Jew, a Sephardic Jew from an old line Jewish family in England. Washington couldn't have cared less about the religion of his doctor. He just cared about, can you solve this medical problem? Can you help our Patsy? And then third, of course, the example I mentioned with his letter to the Jewish leaders in Rhode Island, where he said, bigotry has no sanction in this country. That's a marvelous way to begin a country. And that's a marvelous founding father to have as your leader when it comes to anti-Semitism. And I just don't think we give him enough credit for that. But maybe it's been so many years in the past. I don't know.
We have, the truth of the matter is, as George Washington did, we have bigger fish to fry than caring who, look, we don't have enough healthcare workers.
Right,
We
right,
don't
right.
have enough, college professors
Right.
that, are, scientists, we don't have enough people to build bridges. We don't have enough plumbers. There's a lot of things we don't have enough of. And so to focus on this kind of stuff is not even useful and
No,
productive. And
not at
so
all.
he had serious things to consider.
Right.
And so to be distracted by that would have compromised the future of this country. And I feel like that's kind of where we are now. We're not focused on, we're in the middle of a climate mess. Like, I
Right.
don't, no matter what, I mean, I've been convinced for 20 years that the next world war is going to be fought over water, because
Interesting. Yeah.
there's going to be too much of it. People are going to be drowning in the ocean. At the same time, there's not going to be enough, fresh
Wow.
water. So we're going to be
Wow.
drowning and we're going to be thirsty at the same time. And there's going to be this big,
Which,
and so these are big issues, right? Even if the earth is going to survive, the earth doesn't care about us. So the earth will survive. Okay.
right.
So we shouldn't be focused on, can we save the earth? No, we need to save ourselves. Right.
True.
And so yeah, the people who say that the earth is going to be fine are correct. The earth is going to be fine. We might be,
Right.
mutations of ourselves or die, a slow sort of
Don't,
death
don't,
from our inability to reproduce.
don't you believe that artificial intelligence will save us, Elizabeth? I
Oh
mean, I
God.
keep hearing that in 2 years we're going to be like an autopilot, that AGI will solve everything or
Well,
bring
I
in the
think that we
utopia.
already we already are. I mean, this is what I was saying, sort of like,
Right.
the thing about that is that it won't require us to have a moral compass because it's going to tell us what to do all the time. And
Oh,
so
that's deep.
the
That's
fact
deep.
that we're losing it, that it's just spinning or getting stuck or whatever won't
Okay. So
it won't
suppose in the
matter.
year 2035 we had an AI, Claudine Gay, before Congress, and the AI had to answer that question. Is calling for the set of shoes a violation of the standards of conduct? How would the AI, Claudine Gay, in the year 2035 answer that question? I think AI wouldn't say it
Yeah.
depends upon the context, right?
Oh
I
no,
don't
because
think so.
well, here's the interesting thing is one of the things I criticize, some of the
Yeah.
ideologues on both sides for is
Right.
being too certain, right? That
Uh-huh.
like this degree of certainty. It's like, let's give people room to change their minds. Like I would love
Mm-hmm.
for Claudine Gay to change her mind. Like this,
Mm-hmm.
like that is far superior to her
Yeah.
resigning and even
Yeah.
in disgrace, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, so let's leave people room to change their
Yeah.
mind. But here's the thing about AI. One of its appeals is that it is very certain, right? It could be
Oh,
complete bullshit, but it's
that's true.
completely certain it's
That's
the
right. That's
bullshit.
right. That's right. That's right.
So I think you're right. I don't think it would say like, oh, it depends on the context, because
No, it
that's
wouldn't.
not what AI says, right? It's like, I have an answer. But yeah, did you ever see the movie? You probably, I don't know, maybe you did or didn't. Wall-E. Have you ever seen the movie
Yes, yes, I saw it.
Wall-E?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
So a lot of people didn't see it because, it's a slow starter. It's
yeah.
got this little robot. He's kind of cleaning up the earth, and everybody else is on a spaceship. Okay.
Right.
Everybody's all humans that survived
Hmm.
the Earth's demise.
Right.
And I won't say it's not really demise. It's fine. The Earth
Right.
still exists, but it's covered in trash. And Wall-E has to like notify the mothership
Hmm.
if it sees a biological something growth. Okay.
Yes.
So it sees a little plant. Okay. And it scoops up the plant and it's supposed to send the plant, to as evidence that life can be sustained or grow on Earth. And so the human beings that have been on this spaceship for like way longer
Right.
than they ever
Right.
thought have evolved to have these tiny little arms and legs and these big bulbous bodies. Okay, so they're like little
Hmm.
blobs, and they don't walk because they got these short little legs and everything. They're just on these little motor scooters.
Uh-huh.
Okay,
Uh-huh.
and the motor scooters have screens, so they don't look at each other. They only look at the screen. So at one point in the movie, these two motor scooters hit each other and both of the people fall off of it. Okay. And so they're like turtles on their backs. They can hardly get up because they have like almost no.
Right.
And they roll over and see each other and freak out because they've only been seeing each other on a screen.
Hmm.
And, this idea that, we need less moral turpitude when we're on our screens, when we're, this is not, it doesn't feel real. It
Oh,
doesn't feel organic.
right. Right.
We can, in this age of AI, we can just sort of become these sort of fat bulbous creatures who barely have arms long enough to feed. I mean, they actually drank out of straws because their arms kind of weren't long enough to
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
to
Yeah.
drink. And to have waiting around basically for AI in terms of Wall-E to report back that you could have real life again. And we would just sort of like sit around and wait for AI to say, no, it's okay. You can, you know, there can be growth again. There can be real, I mean, it's a little plant,
Hmm.
right? This
Hmm.
little green plant. And you could just feel like, I don't remember the music, but it was something like, oh, it's like
Yeah.
it's like, yeah. And, and that's what I worry that's what we're going to be like, like that we're going to be waiting around for, we're just going to be focused on a screen,
Oh,
waiting
yeah.
around for AI. And I'll tell you what, I'm not even sure people can get together anymore in a way that they can procreate. I mean, when I'm looking at the people I don't know how they do it. I don't know how they do it. When I go to the gym, they're not speaking to each other. Like, everybody's afraid. So the
Uh-huh.
girls, I don't know that this is actually happening in my gym, but there's stuff online where girls are
Yeah.
trying to catch guys looking at them in the gym, and then they
I've
post
seen
it
that. Yeah.
online.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, like, everybody's like averting their eyes, they're like afraid to talk to one another. And so how could a guy who was even interested figure out, because they can't make eye contact. I don't even know and I feel bad for the men like my age. I kind of try to talk to them occasionally, because
Yeah.
I feel like one time there was a young girl, scantily clad, I might add, and a
Mhm.
guy like my age, and they were facing each other by happens. They couldn't not be facing each other with the piece
Right.
of
Right.
equipment that they were using.
Mhm.
And I felt so bad for this guy, because he's got to be like, he can't look, right? So
Right. Of course not.
I like talking to him so he can like look at me. So yeah, I think we're not that far off of this sort of AI mentality.
Mhm.
This
Mhm.
and this idea that um, it's better. Like, I hear this from my students all the time. I have a lot going on.
Mhm.
So since I have a lot going on, I just need to get a pass on this test or
Oh,
on
okay.
this
Right.
assignment or whatever.
Right.
And so the idea of using AI for one of those assignments that you and I would have considered part of our opportunity to read something with, even if we didn't like it, at least
Mhm.
read it to learn something,
Yeah.
So this is not how people look at it now. It's like, I need to get through this hurdle so I can get through the next hurdle so I can get through the
Mhm.
next
Mhm.
hurdle. And then I will have, a degree. And, to sort of get back to the Claudine Gay thing, if even getting to be a college president is just this sort of like a hurdle,
Oh.
then
Oh.
what's the harm really in, she didn't use AI, but in essentially appropriating, someone else's ideas in order to do it?
Because it's
Because
immoral. Because it's immoral,
oh,
number
exactly.
one.
But I'm just saying, like, people, but
Sure.
this is sort of where we're going.
This
You
is
know
where
what I
we're
mean?
going.
Like,
Yeah.
instead of seeing this as a educational, as teaching people how to
Yeah.
think as an educational exercise, I see this as a series of hurdles.
Mhm.
Then canceling somebody, check, right? Thesis, check.
Yeah.
Dissertation, check. And putting a lot more into it isn't worth it, because either you have it or you don't. It's
Mhm.
not, any
Mhm.
more than that. And so I think that we're already more there maybe than you
Sure.
think. And
Sure.
there's already signs of it, maybe.
Wow. Well, I mean, that may be true, and that is discomforting. I mean, one of the things
Yes.
I hope, and time will tell. My sense is always that young people rebel against the world they come into. Young
Mhm.
people always find different ways of expressing themselves. Um, could it be that the young kids born in, say, the 2030s and the 2040s will reject this ethos, this milieu, this way of being, because they'll see the limitations? What do you think about that?
I hope so. And I think about that all the time too, because we do
Mhm.
have this sort of,
Right,
this churn, right, where you have to fight it against, what
right,
was
right.
before. Um,
And,
and I think that there's a lot of hand wringing in every generation
mhm, mhm,
about, it's like
yeah.
I'm sure that my parents did this exactly the same thing, like, oh my God, what's the world coming
Sure,
to, and all that kind of
sure.
stuff. So yeah, I hope so. And I do already hear from people maybe in their 30s or
Mhm,
40s who have kids who are just now having kids, so
mhm, yeah.
who have sort of witnessed this, you know um sort of zombie generation,
Right, right.
social media addicted,
Yeah,
whatever, and saying, I don't want my kid to have that technology,
yeah.
as early. I don't. So I do think that there's, some levels,
Mhm,
um, levels of awareness. And by the way, to speak to your sort of rebel thing, I did think of that also in terms of the testimony, the congressional testimony, which is that, universities they are there to help people learn to think. And it is historically, we can point to any moment in history where there have been college students saying stupid
Mm-hmm.
stuff,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
protesting stupid stuff,
Sure. But not the college
pushing the
presidents.
boundaries, right? Well, no, but what I was going to
Oh,
say was
yeah.
that sort of, I think that there was this missed opportunity in continuing to say context.
Yeah.
There was a missed opportunity to advocate for the university as you and I fondly remember it,
Yes.
which is as this place where you could, oops, I signed something I shouldn't have signed.
Right. Right.
Oops, I joined that club, and after a while I realized that I didn't really agree with what
Mm-hmm.
was going on. That this idea that we are here, we are a place for 18 to 22-year-olds and even older, but to figure out what they believe in. And if we're, again, they couldn't say this because they'd been squelching speech in other ways, but
Right.
if we allow some people to sort of try on different identities here in this environment and actually learn what
Mm-hmm.
that means, because this is it. Like
Right.
once they're off at their job and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I've had to fire students from my research lab. I've had them fail
Mm-hmm.
massively, and I've always told them, even if I had to fire them from the lab, I have always said, this is the opportunity for you to fail, because this has no consequences.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
I said, like, I will not tell some other lab that you're a bad person or anything like that. You can move on from this. If you were in a job, you might be forever tainted. If you were
Yeah.
in a marriage and you did this and you had kids, you could lose your ability to see your kids or whatever. And so these are the times for people to screw up.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But in a learning environment, in
Yeah.
an opportunity, in a place where they're supposed to be learning to think. And if we keep telling them, don't think that way, don't think that way, do think this way. If we keep doing that, we are going to get this, these people that think it's totally okay to check in with AI and get told a certitude.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think that there were some missed opportunities to say things like, speech is not violence. We're an institution that, I honestly, I don't think a president has any, I don't think universities have any business issuing statements. And I don't think we have any business expecting a single individual to represent, an entire university. I think
Oh, really?
that's
You don't think
offensive.
one
That's
person
offensive
should
to me.
not?
I know that
Okay.
my university president sure as hell does not represent me, and
Okay.
I'm not saying that every part of his job is, I'm not suggesting that he
Sure.
does every part
Right.
of his job badly, but he's definitely spoke for me on multiple occasions
Sure.
where he claimed, he apologized for me and my students and, that kind of thing.
Right.
But he certainly does not speak for me. And I don't expect the president of the United States to speak for the
Sure.
entire United States. So,
But I think there's a
that.
difference between representation, which I agree with, and leadership, which I think you and I probably agree with on well. So, for example, when I think of my favorite college president, I'm always drawn back to 1926. In 1926, the U.S. was a different place. It was a place of Jim Crow segregation. It was a place of blatant prejudice and bigotry. But in 1926, the Board of Trustees at Howard University in Washington, D.C. decided, you know, things are really bad. There's a racial nadir here. You had the burning of quote-unquote Black Wall Street in Tulsa in 1921, the Rosewood Massacre in 1923. You had the March of 30,000 Klansmen down Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. on August 8th, 1925. So the far-sighted Board of Trustees at Howard in 1926 decided this may be a racial nadir, but we can invest in a new president that will lead us as a school, as a university, to a brighter future. And so they chose a young minister, a young Baptist preacher. His name was Mordecai Johnson. He was like maybe 36 years old. And it was an excellent choice for a college president. Why do I say that? Because from the get-go, President Johnson had a clear vision of the next 30 years for that university. The university was simply a backwoods, unrespected university. His aim was to make it a world-class, respected university. He wanted that university to have solid funding. It always had sporadic funding from alumni sources and religious groups. He secured permanent federal funding for that school within a year or two so that the school would always have a source of guaranteed income. Tremendous vision. And then number three, he decided that Howard should be the base, ground zero, for training young minds to challenge segregation. So he appointed the brightest Black minds he could find to lead the law school, to lead the medical school, to lead the English department, to lead the physics department. He swept out the dead wood and brought in the brightest Black minds in academia. And as a result of that, the law school became the center of training for minds like Thurgood Marshall and Oliver Hill. And that would eventually lead to litigation and the Brown decision in 1954. So I guess my point is that was an A-plus example of a young college president who provided leadership. He had a clear vision of a better future, and we could see the benefits of that over the coming 30 years. And I could not imagine Howard President Mordecai Johnson ever lacking moral courage at any moment. If he had testified before Congress in 1926, and the question had been, is calling for the genocide of Black Americans a matter of context? Yeah, you know the answer. Is calling for Jews a matter of context? He would have provided the moral answer. So I guess that's why I really am so disappointed with Gay, because, I mean, even just from a Black American perspective, I mean, she's kind of left a taint, if you will, on the reputation of Black college presidents. But you can go back to 1926, a century ago, and you had Herculean, you had epic examples of moral leadership in the offices of Black college presidents. Where is the Mordecai Johnson of the 2020s? It's not Claudine Gay.
No, and I don't know where they are. I mean,
It's a good question.
Yeah,
it's a good.
It
Well,
is.
let's talk about. Do you think that diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts have reduced the potential of Black college presidents to rise to the same level of moral distinction that they had in the 1920s? Like you think of college president Booker T. Washington Tuskegee, Mordecai Johnson at Howard, the president of Hampton Institute, the president of Lincoln College, the president of Wilberforce College. There's a long tradition, which for some reason we don't study in our woke classes nowadays, of Black college professors just knocking it out of the ballpark in terms of the moral challenges of their time. Do you think that DEI efforts, for whatever reason, have suppressed or lessened the genius of Black college professors today? Is there a correlation between the two?
Well, I would go further. I would just say that DEI efforts have reduced the moral, courage of pretty much every president. I mean, I don't think it's a Black white thing.
White
I don't
thing.
think it's a, I really don't. I think that, and I mean, I think perhaps the perception from, outsiders, if you will, maybe
Mhm.
is, like, I mean, look, it would be easy to say, oh, well, Claudine Gay got the job because she's Black.
Mhm.
Right. And
That's an
so
easy
from
answer.
that
I still, for
from,
example, wrote an essay about that in Newsweek
yeah.
magazine.
So from that standpoint, I think DEI has harmed the reputations
Mhm.
of, I don't think it has gotten in the way of the moral uh, courage or the morality of a
Mhm.
Black rising star any more than
Mhm.
it does a white rising star,
Mhm.
because I think that from that standpoint it's universally stunting the growth of anybody in education who has moral courage. I really
You're
do.
forcing people to be less moral in service
Yes.
of dogma.
Yes.
That's a
And
horrible thing,
again,
Elizabeth. That's
yeah,
horrible.
it is. Yeah, it is. And just this idea that, like, and when it comes flooding, every once in a while, of course, you come head on with this. And I think people are just becoming better and better at ignoring that compass, at, just letting it spin,
Yeah.
um and it's an aversive I think it's more aversive now when they have to when it comes to the fore, when their moral compass suddenly you know s- gets right back in line again, and they're like, oh, holy crap, that's the aversive state now, as opposed to in the past, where the aversive state was when they were lacked moral courage, or were confused in some way, like there was some kind of conflict. I think that, yeah, I mean, I
Are
hate
we
to say
replic-
it, but
so are we replicating the 1920s in German universities in terms of courage of faculty members, moral courage? Are we replicating that experience? What do you think? Are we?
I hope not, but I couldn't say no. I don't think I can say no to that.
Wow.
I don't think I can say no to that.
Wow. And so we're going to
So,
have these, increasingly, we're going to have these moral points of moral courage over the 2020s and 2030s, if that trend
yeah.
holds up.
And we have seen people, not just the rabbi, but other people, resign in protest.
Yeah.
People, going to the University of Texas, or University of
Yeah.
Austin, right, and that kind of, and making
Sure.
trying to make a stand about it. So we have seen some people like Einstein who are saying, I'm not having this.
Right. Right.
Um, but right now, we're not really seeing that. I mean, I think in our little world, because we have each other, we're, it's like there's moments to be hopeful,
Right.
but I don't think I mean, so far I'm not seeing that on
Our,
boots on
and
the ground is
yeah.
making any
Yeah.
difference.
And the way you said it, our little world. I mean, I think that's something to that. I mean, we can easily forget that counterweight is not the universe.
Right.
That's easy to forget sometimes.
Yes.
What was his name? Bob Ackman? Was that the hedge fund manager who got involved in the effort out of Pershing Square? Do you remember who I'm talking about?
No.
He was the guy who was on Twitter calling for the immediate resignation of Gray and disgrace because of the issues involving her answer, and he was quite active. And then he said he felt the Board of Overseers protected Gray because they didn't want to have the appearance of an outsider forcing the Board of
Hmm.
Overseers to make a decision. So it was about local control, if you will, of their selection choice. I mean, what do you think about that? Did someone like Bob Ackman, who was really aggressive in taking the moral crusade, did he actually hurt the cause because he made it easy for Harvard insiders to say, well, this is just self-interested outsiders, wealthy donors trying to impose their will on the poor, oppressed, hapless President Gay.
Well, I mean, the short answer is yes, of course. But at the same time, again, like, I'm just sort of like hoping for this sort of, like, I'm hoping there's inner turmoil. I'm hoping that she is waking up like I do at 2 a.m. and fussing over this stuff. And, I hope it is keeping her from sleeping at night as much as it does Roland Fryer and the rabbi, and for different reasons, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
what would my life have been like if not for, for Claudine Gay, right? And I hope that she is torturing herself over, but for the, she's got a lot of but fors, these were, many of them were, if not completely, certainly the majority of which were under her control, So again, I don't want to discount this sort of like, she did not do these things all on her own. She would never have attacked Roland Fryer if she didn't know that she had backup.
Yeah.
Because I don't believe that she attacked him because she truly believed that he was the immoral one. I do not believe that she attacked him for that reason. There were other more pragmatic reasons. And so I'm not going to give her credit for like having the moral high ground there,
Yeah.
So I don't want to say that, I don't want to say, oh, she's acting all on her own and everything, because that's not what I see at universities. But again, where was, so like, a dean of faculty, where is that kind of person on campus, academic affairs, who is to be, who should be rushing to the defense in some way. I mean, I don't know what kind of a Roland Fryer, right?
I think Gay was the dean of academic affairs.
Yeah. Yeah. Of faculty, I think you might be right, like dean of faculty affairs or something like that. Yes,
right.
But where are those, people with some power to step in and go, like you said, slow your roll. Let's go have lunch with this person, right?
Yeah.
I don't know where those people are. Even on my own campus, again, even if I have some sort of like private support or whatever, there's no one who seems willing to, to just kind of, somebody, look, it happened right here in my neighborhood where someone was riding by on their bicycle, the dean of academic affairs or whatever her thing was. She's riding by on her bicycle and she saw me and she pulls over her bicycle off campus and, just says, well, what can I do? And I'm like, it's too late. What do you mean, what can you do? It's been 6 months. The time to do something, the time to talk about academic freedom, the time to talk about, what it means to consent in a research project, to read a consent document, all of to reinforce all of the things that students already had been taught, who maybe were exposed to a research study, had already been taught, but to reinforce the university's support for those things was 6 months ago. There's nothing to be done for me now. And
that
Roland
was the
Fryer,
Toby Ziegler moment. That was the Toby Ziegler moment.
Exactly. So where are these people is what you're kind of asking. And I wish I knew. I wish that I knew. We have a endowed chair of academic freedom and expression or something now.
Okay.
They created that after, what happened to me.
I thought you were going to say of freedom, equity, and inclusion.
No. Oh, we have those too. Oh, no, we have those too. Yeah. Yeah. No, we have those. Everybody has one of those, or multiples of those, because we have a vice president and then we have an associate vice president and we have a assistant vice president of all of those things. Yeah.
These are
this is like,
these are commissars.
Yes. So, but this person is also just like that. This person has never stood up, in any kind of way or anything. So in theory, they have a position that would endow them with that, even if they don't even have the moral compass themselves. They have been sort of handed one to carry around with them, right? Check this one if yours isn't working. And I don't really see that. So and I don't totally understand the fear, because it's not like McCarthyism where you might like, at least get your day in court. This is no day in court. This is just, burning at the stake, or not even, you just sort of like, marginalized or whatever.
So is it like the Salem witch trials thing?
Well,
More
lots of
than
people have made that. Yeah, lots of people have made that. And I think that there is a little bit of that because, it's like, oh, we're going to tie a bunch of rocks to you and throw you in the lake, right? And if you
Right.
don't drown, then you're a witch. If you do drown, then you weren't a witch, but sorry about your luck, right?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So, or if we're going to burn you at the stake, and if you don't actually die, then,
Right, right.
you're a witch. And if you do die, you weren't, but and so I do think there's a little bit of that, and a little bit of that in terms of just this sort of cartoonish, almost campy kind
Campy.
of of campy kind of violence, where people it's like, oh well, nobody really got hurt kind of thing, because nobody was really burned at the stake, and nobody's it's like, you still have a job, so what do you want kind of
Yeah.
thing. But I don't think people fear people like me. I don't think people are afraid of Roland Fryer. I don't think people are afraid of me. I think that in the same way that people might have been afraid of witches, right? Where they might have been afraid that they might actually be the target or might get sick or something like that. So there was a lot more uncertain. I think witchcraft actually had some basis in, it explained some things the same way that, mythology explains some things and stuff. And you sometimes chamomile tea did make you feel better kind of thing, so there was like a little bit of, it explained some things. And I don't think that this sort of, you're a racist or you're an anti-Semite or you're a this or you're a that, explains any kind of illness in the way that they want to argue that it does. I don't think we have I don't think people are afraid of me in that same, I mean, I talk about like I'm contaminated, but it's a different kind of, it's a social disease.
Sure. Right.
And so I don't think people are afraid of me. They're afraid of other people. They're afraid of, it's like, but for the grace of God, go I, like the little, like elementary school playground kind of thing. It's like, I'm not afraid of the person who's getting bullied. I'm afraid of the other people. And so I do think it's different.
But Elizabeth, there's some people who, perhaps because of their personality or their temperament, are drawn to those who are bullied and marginalized by others. So case in point, when you tell me your stories, I feel closer to you. I feel more drawn to you. When I read about Roland Fryer, I was just like ready to storm
Livid.
the
You were
gates
livid.
of,
Yeah.
And the same with Rabbi David Wolpe. I felt like this is a guy, who needs to, we need to clone him. And that if anyone's going to marginalize him, I feel like I should be there standing side by side with him. So I guess my question is, why are there people like me who are drawn to those who are bullied and denigrated? What is that about?
Well, I talked to, do you know who Elizabeth Weiss is?
No.
She was she's an anthropologist
Okay.
or was an anthropologist at University of California, Santa Clara. She's still an anthropologist, but she's no longer there. And oh my God, what this woman has been through. So I'm retelling her story. I'm probably messing some things up, but it has to do with the gendering of bones. Okay.
Right.
So they wanted her to purge her databases of the gender classification. In some cases, they wanted, they like quite literally in a conflagration burned some of her materials, incinerated them or whatever. They they made a policy that a menstruating woman could not enter the lab because indigenous many indigenous peoples segregated women who were menstruating, and only women would come and visit that tent and feed them or whatever. Okay. So anyway, just crazy stuff. And she did negotiate her own exit. So she is somebody who had like this sense of, moral courage. And she's been talking about, she negotiated her exit in a way that allowed her to keep talking about it, which was great. And so, but one of the things that we talked about the ethics codes for anthropology. And I said, it seems to me that what they're doing is against their own ethics code in terms of, because of course anthropology requires this maintenance, this respect for physical artifacts that they're actually wanting to rebury, destroy, whatever. I mean, these are, you can't just go do another study and collect new data on this. I mean, this is all you got. And so we were going through the ethics codes and she was like, yeah, I know, it doesn't make any sense. And I said, well, I've had the same argument with people within my own field, in the field of psychology, where I say this doesn't line up. Your behavior does not line up with the code of ethics in psychology. And psychology actually had their own, have had lots of issues internally where they've sort of added these like extra diversity things that then don't match up with their original code of ethics. It's all very messy, and it took hundreds of pages to do that. The American Library Association has had a similar kind of thing where their own code of ethics has these hypocrisies in it, and then they added like a ninth thing that is all about equity, and it's in conflict with other things. And so I think that, again, this is sort of to your George Washington example and your, that kind of thing, which is that some of us, whoever those people are, I think maybe in some ways we're more simple-minded because somebody hands us a code of ethics. Right. And we're like, yeah, I think we should follow those. And the rest of the world is like, no, it's a free for all. We get to change that. And we're just like, no. Right. And thank God there are, that George Washington said, look, there's a code of ethics here, and I don't really care who gets it done. We're going to get this job done. And because it matters, these freedoms matter. Right. And so I'm sure that he hurt some people along the way. It's not like he's perfect, right? Right. And he made some mistakes, and he didn't acknowledge some people. He spoke for people that they didn't feel like he was speaking for them. Right. I mean, it's not like everybody in the country was like, yeah, that's, just like a college president doesn't speak for every single person on campus and shouldn't be expected to. Yeah. But I think that in some cases, it's like, like I'm like, yeah, you told me these were the ethics and I bought into them. Yeah. I feel like they're in my genetic code now. And
so I think it's a personality thing myself. I think that as we go on in life, we're going to find that more and more of these issues boil down to personality differences, I think. And that's something which is innate, I think. And really, it's core to who you are. It's kind of core to how you perceive the world, if you will. So that's why you need more people.
I would say that it's, go ahead. Yeah, I would say it's more of a perfect storm in that we need all kinds of people. And so I don't ever like to say, oh, it's a personality thing, as if we could root out the, it's like, oh, you have the wrong personality for this time in our, whatever. And so I don't think there's any right or wrong with that. I do think that there's sort of a perfect storm in which during certain times of our history, certain kinds of things appeal to the sorts of, to different sorts of people. And sometimes those things take hold and sometimes they don't. But I definitely, the personality thing is kind of,
my opinion, I think that in 1926, when that Board of Trustees chose that young Baptist preacher to be the president of that unknown, nondescript black college in D.C., they chose the right personality. And
but think about this.
Had the right personality.
But look, they had nowhere to go but up. it's like, this is like, in many ways, that is less of a risk, right? So you can choose this young whippersnapper, right? Who thinks he's, he's got the moral high ground or whatever, and has the charisma and all that personality, right? But if you're a Harvard, that's not what you have nowhere to go but down.
You have nowhere to go but down.
So when I was in industry,
wait. Do you think Lawrence Lowell felt that way? Do you think that Larry Summers felt that way?
Yeah.
Do you think that Derek Bach felt that way?
Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, it's like in industry, people talk about this all the time, where they say, don't take over a thriving sales district. Like, you don't want to do that, because the odds are it can't continue to be the best, right? And so if you take it over when it's doing well, then there's nowhere to go but down. So you always want to take over the sales district that's suffering, because it's not your fault if it continues to suffer, and you get to be a superstar if it improves. So I would say that I don't think that it was such a risky choice.
So that was the real wisdom of that Baptist preacher in 1926. Yeah. He had a nondescript, no-name college, and he could only go up.
Yeah.
That's a good point. That's a very good point. I like that. But he did. That
he did, and they did. Yes.
Right.
But I don't think it was that risky of a choice for him, and I don't think it was that risky of a choice for the college. They were already, struggling, and it's like, hey, we might as well, just. But if you're looking for a president of Harvard, and you're in this soup that we're in right now, you want somebody who has already demonstrated that she will go to the mattresses on some of this ideology, that she'll continue to fuel those flames. So unfortunately, it came back to bite them when she testified. Yeah,
and so now we'll see how long she'll be able to maintain that perch. So I think it could be a few years, but I think you're more pessimistic in terms of her longevity.
Yeah, I think even if she lasts, I think we're not going to see this. I think
the turmoil will go on. The drama will continue.
Well, and I think they kept it's like, oh, look, we have this, we have a black female president, and isn't she great? And I think that they're going to be kind of like, maybe you shouldn't go to that party. You shouldn't go to that party.
Elizabeth. What must be said behind closed doors in chambers these days, right?
But again, I would like that because I think that that's part of the reckoning that needs to come.
Social pressure from her peers. Yeah. Good point.
And for everyone to feel like, wait a minute, maybe we overstepped our our bounds here, and I do think that. Certainly those three schools and maybe eventually others are going to have to go back to some of their codes of conduct and that kind of stuff. Now here's one issue though. It's going to take a lot longer because, for example, these kinds of things like DEI
Elizabeth,
statements.
Just so you know, I have an urgent appointment at 3 minutes, so I have to head out in 3 minutes. No problem. But this has been fun. I've enjoyed this.
Yeah. Yes. Well, we can wrap this up. I was just going to say that I think that it's baked in more ways than just in people's personalities and their behaviors, because it's also in a lot of other paperwork. It's in accreditation.
Yes.
Submissions now.
Yes.
And once you get accreditation based on a plan, you have to carry that plan out. So that's a 10-year plan. Yeah. It's in union contracts now. It's in those kinds of things. And so it's going to take longer. But that's why I want people who have their feet to the flame to be in those positions, to be like, well, maybe we don't want to put that in the next go round.
That's a good point. That's a very good point. I'm going to think about that, chew on that. On those good ideas.
So I'm sorry that I kept you so long, but it was a great conversation.
It was great. Yeah, I enjoyed it. Time flew by. So
yes.
I didn't know what time it was. So until we meet again, and I wish Jennifer had been here, but maybe next time.
Yes. Thank you so much.
No problem. And I'll stay in touch.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.